This is the Giant Mouse Ace Farley in brass. And this is really the best of Giant Mouse as a brand. So the Ace Farley has been around for a little while. Again, this version is in brass. You can also get it in micarta. This one that I've got here is in M390. If you order off their site today, most of them will be in LMAX. And frankly, I'll talk about the steel a little bit. I would recommend getting an LMAX version if you can, but this is still a very good knife no matter what version you get. This one retails for $165 right now. It is made in China by Bestech. This is not made in Italy, though it looks a whole lot like and feels a whole lot like a lot of Giant Mouse's Italian-made knives. 118 thousandths on the blade stock, 2.75 inches for the blade, and 3.5 ounces is the weight of this knife, and that's because it's brass. And this is fully brass. You know, there's the liners, yeah, it's brass all the way through the inside. The only liner is this back string, but frankly, the steel would be lighter than the brass. This is a solid piece of brass, and it feels it. If you want to get this in micarta, you can get a version that is micarta with steel liners, which will be significantly lighter. Though, as I'll talk about in the full review here, I think the brass suits this very well. So that's enough introduction. Let's get into the knife. So the Ace Farley here is a slip joint. And so that means, you got your back spring here, and this is not locking. You press down, and it will just snap like that. At the half stop here, it is flush at the half stop, flush fully open, flush fully closed, meaning this back spring here is flush with that scale. This is pretty much a nail nick opener. So there is a nail nick right here, and you basically have to grab on that nail nick to get it out. Technically, you can, if you get really lucky, actually once or twice I've been able to grab on the blade out here, but honestly, you're gonna have to use that nail nick to get this out. It's a moderately strong pull, not as strong as something like a Jack Wolf knife. I'm not that much of a slip joint guy, so I can't put a number on it, but it is a slightly lighter pull than some other slip joints I've had, though it is a pretty heavy close. So not super heavy, but heavy enough that it's satisfying. But again, you have to use that nail nick there. So if you're not a fan of nail nicks, just know that I'm not the biggest fan of nail nicks, and I sort of like this knife enough once it's open that I'm dealing with the fact that it's forcing me to use a nail nick to open it. And the reason that this blade is very good start with the blade. The reason this knife is very good start with the blade. So this blade here, again, this version is M390. If you see it on Giant Mouse's site, you're going to get it in LMAX. I will tell you, just for the steel right up front, the M390 itself has not been so great. You can see I've got a chip, or at least a roll, in the blade right there. There's another one that I can sometimes find that's a little closer to the tip. Can't see it right now, but I know it's there. I certainly feel it. This is pretty soft M390. That was not very much use that caused that roll. I think the hardest stuff that I was cutting was some woody plant material. And we still got a roll there. It is a pretty slim bevel. So it's not like this was sharpened to be tough. And frankly, it's a slip joint. It's not going to be a hard use knife anyway. But it's not so bad that I recommend against getting this knife because of it. But that's the reason that I say if you're choosing between LMAX and M390, Giant Mouse tends to do LMAX quite well. LMAX is a very well-balanced steel, especially for the sort of, mid-weight, mid to harder use knives that Giant Mouse tries to make that aren't trying to be screamingly sharp or super tough or anything like that. LMAX is a nicely balanced steel. M390 can be a great steel too, but it does feel a little soft here on the heat treat. But this blade itself is really, really nice. It's very simple. Pretty simple drop point design, almost a spear point. Meaning the grind is pretty similar on both sides. It is a full flat grind from 118 thousandths with a nicely crowned spine here. And so this comes down to a very sharp edge. This knife was impressively sharp in use, and that is because of the blade geometry, not because of the edge being spectacular. The edge is fine. But the blade geometry is very keen, very slicey. This cuts even delicate and lightweight materials very well. And then especially in this brass version where you got a little bit more weight in your hand, it cuts so well that it can make heavier duty tasks feel a little lighter duty just because it slices extremely nicely. This blade shape is very intuitive in the hand. When you combine it with your handle ergonomics here, fits very nicely in the hand, points naturally out. When you hold it, up in your fingers like this, like you'll tend to hold a lot of slip joints, it's very easy, especially for fine detail work. This blade works really well. When you pinch it up, it's so easy to just get right next to that edge, and whatever you need to cut at or shave at or trim, it's very nice, very easy to use. A very intuitive blade shape executed very well here. They did put a pretty typical belt satin on here. As you've seen me wipe fingerprints off this like 6 times in the video, it does attract fingerprints. I don't care while I'm using it. I only care when they sort of show up in extreme case under video and lights like this. Would I prefer stonewash? Yes. Does it bother me that it's a belt satin? No. So overall, a very good blade. I don't love the steel, but honestly, most of the people picking up these today are going to be getting it in LMAX anyway. I don't love the fact that it's a nail nick, but you get used to it, and honestly, if you're looking at slip joints, you're used to nail nicks by this point. Reason this is a very good knife, though, does come down to the handle, and as you might know, Giant Mouse is the combination of Jens Onso and Jesper Voxnes. Both are very well-known custom knife designers who have been making excellent knives for probably at least 2 decades, both of them. And Giant Mouse knives tend to have excellent ergonomics, and this one is no exception. This handle is a series of very intelligently designed curves. Actually, if you know Onso's work well, this is not dissimilar from parts of the shape of his Neo Custom, which I owned a while back and was one of the most exceptional custom knives I've ever had. You've got basically a big swell coming right off the back of the blade here that very gradually swoops down to the base here. You've got a really nicely done exposed backspacer, which just transitions quite seamlessly. The back spring into the backspacer. It's all just one piece here. It looks very nice, looks very clean, crowned nicely. And when I sort of say that, fit and finish wise, actually I'll get into fit and finish later, but it's very good. Very nice gradual curve toward the butt here. Bit of a sharp point when you need something that's going to dig into your hand, need a little anchor point. And Vox and Onso like to do this as well. You got a big belly here and then a relatively sharp point at the back of that belly. And that is so when you get your hands in here, this little point at the back and this little point at the front do keep your hand in place more than if they were rounded off. Then the entire scales on top of that are contoured, and you can see it there. It's a very nice, even contour. It's pretty much a unidirectional contour, meaning there isn't any contour in this direction. It's only sort of across from the top to the bottom of the handle. But it is very nicely done, very even. All the edges are rounded off nicely. No real visible machine marks. It's not like you can see the micro milling. Brass helps with that, because once the patina comes in brass, it sort of takes a lot of those imperfections out. Completely symmetrical knife. This is a completely ambidextrous knife. The lefty and righty experience is completely identical. But the ergonomics on this gently swept handle are phenomenal. You get it in your hand like that. You've got a very natural pinch point here with your first finger and your thumb. I can get, for bigger hands, this is going to be a 3-finger knife with your 4th on the butt back here. I can get all 4 in here. You can't choke up. You cannot choke up on this handle. You're going to run into that blade. This is just a sharpening choil. But even when I was only getting 3 fingers, if I got 3 fingers, I would tend to sort of put my thumb up on the blade, or even if I was going to get 3 fingers, I would climb 3 fingers up and pinch my index finger and thumb up onto the front of the knife. All of these grips work really well, And again, this is part of the reason that I like the brass here. This brass is, as you would expect, very handle heavy. Right now, it basically feels like I am carrying a handle, not carrying a knife. And one of the results of a nicely contoured, very dense, handle heavy knife like this is it feels super, super secure in the hand. And while I was using this, this gave me a level of security and purchase over this knife, over this blade, even as I pushed it harder, even as I got closer to that tip, and even as I sort of reached out further with this knife. A level of purchase and security that I am not used to having in knives of this size, and knives with a sub 3-inch blade. Often those smaller knives can, especially a knife that is really smaller, something like the Native will be a smaller knife in terms of sharpened blade length, but ends up being a bit of a larger knife overall when you account for the fact that it is a relatively thick knife. And if you look at it in the pocket, your Native takes up about twice as much space in the pocket as something like your Giant Mouse Ace Farley does here. So that is one way to take your small knife and give it excellent ergonomics, is to just make it fat, make it tall, make it big in the hand, even though it's small. That works very well for Spyderco. It's often a necessity for Spyderco because of the spider hole mechanism, just making their knives big. But it does mean that you've got a short knife, but it's not a small knife per se. Then you got something like the Farley here, which is small. It is not only short, it is small. It is a small object. It is, even smaller in the pocket and in the hand than something like the Delica, which is a small knife to begin with. And yet, this knife, when I started using it, feels about as secure in the hand as something like a Native. Feels more secure in the hand than something like a Delica. And you combine that with the fact that it's got a very slicey blade here, and it ends up being a really pleasant, really effective cutting experience. When I use this knife, whether it's for EDC tasks, or I use it for gardening tasks, or I even use it for a little bit of, light home improvement type stuff, cutting through a few boxes, cutting through some twine, stuff like that, this knife performed surprisingly well. Which you've probably heard is a refrain that I'm starting to say a lot with these Giant Mouse reviews, which is Giant Mouse, their ergonomics are so good that they make knives that perform surprisingly well. You look at this knife and there's nothing that impressive about it when you look at it on the table, but then you pick it up and you feel how well this gradual contour and all of these little nooks work into your hand. Again, whether you're doing a full 4-finger grip or you're pinching up on the blade here. In this grip in particular, where you're holding your 3 fingers are back on the handle, this is resting right into the bottom of your knuckles here, and you're pinching up on the blade. This grip is excellent. This grip is super secure, super precise, and you can even push this blade relatively hard in this grip. And if you want to push it further, you can get a full saber grip. And as long as you're not really pushing down on the back of that blade, this is a strong enough slip joint that it's going to feel pretty secure. Pushing down like this for anything like whittling or really pushing into something, it's a handle that feels excellent in the hand. And again, I really like this brass iteration in particular because this works well in a handle-heavy configuration. It's a thin knife to begin with, and this heavy, contoured handle that fits snugly in the hand ends up just really naturally giving you tons of control over the blade. This isn't going to be something you're going to use for long, extended cutting tasks anyway, so some of the problems that tend to come with handle-heavy knives aren't as much of an issue here. This is really a knife that you want to, either be able to pull out and, if you're doing things in the garden or you're breaking down a few blocks or something like that. This is the sort of knife you would have in your pocket to use for, a couple minutes to half an hour at a time, and not for heavier duty stuff. It probably could do it. It feels secure enough in the hand that to the extent any knife this size can do those longer, heavier tasks, this one would compete with a lot of the knives that can do that really, really well. But that's not its primary use case. And so this handle-heavy design, I really like the way it feels in use. Last piece that was impressive here, given both the price point and Giant Mouse's history, is the level of fit and finish. Now, you might remember I mentioned at the top of the review, this one is made by Bestech, which is a Chinese knife company, and it is different from the companies that Giant Mouse has used traditionally. Giant Mouse historically made their knives in two places. They made them in Italy, where they were made by Maniago, or made in Maniago, probably by Fox Knives, I would suspect, and they made them in China by Riot. And the Riot-made knives were basically the flippers. You know, the Riv was made by Riot. There were a couple more that had sort of the faster, fancier actions. Were made by Riot, and their more traditional washer knives were generally made in Maniago. As I've said in my Nimbus review, and as I will say in a couple other Giant Mouse reviews coming up, the Maniago knives tend to succeed in spite of their fit and finish. They tend to be priced high for what they are, and everything just doesn't quite feel as tight as even something like a Golden Colorado Spyderco would, let alone, something like this, or something from Wee Knives, or something even from, Seki City in Spyderco. It's just the fit and it's not that anything is bad, it's that stuff, well, actually sometimes the actions are quite bad, but things don't quite feel as tight, as refined. But Bestech here has done a really good job with this. The blade is pretty simple. They did a nice job with the rounding. They did a very good job with the grind. Again, I love how skinny that bevel is, because this was a very aggressive flat grind that comes down very thin behind the edge. The backspring, again, action is very smooth and nice. The execution of the backspring, again, even in the half stop, the whole backspring here is crowned the whole way down with a little, this is really ornamental, but it looks really cool. And lots of little details, like the way they do this little cutout right in front of the backspacer here, just looks really nice. But that's, those are the sort of design details that Vox and Onso do really well. But the blade is fine, but it is this handle where the fit and finish really shows off. You've got, a relatively custom designed screw here. There's nothing fancy about it, but it's not a screw design that I have seen elsewhere. Just flattened off, nicely satined there. The screws are nicely, they're proud a little bit, but they're certainly flush at the edges, and they are intentionally proud in the sense that you don't feel them, and they are basically, all consistently the same amount proud in a way that I believe is intentional. They look nice. The contouring is very nicely and evenly and consistently done. There are no machine marks I can see, where with a lot of these contour knives you can see the micro milling pattern that was used to take that final pass, the ball mill. They did do, a little bit of internal milling, but is that even... Yeah, that's internal milling. It's kind of internal milling to the extent that I wonder why they did it. They took so little material out, and it's still a 3.5 ounce knife, so I don't know why they made the effort, but hey, maybe it would have been a 4 ounce knife if they didn't do that, so cool. It's a little bit of an extra step, but it just feels really nice and refined. This whole knife feels extremely well put together. The clip is a standard Giant Mouse wire clip. You're going to love it or hate it. I happen to love wire clips. Oh, and by the way, there's a slip joint that you get a clip on. That's cool. It helps complete the package, and frankly, when I look at this knife for $165, and I've got it over here, my Nimbus, which is a knife that I end up very much liking. By the way, the Nimbus looks huge compared to this guy, despite the fact that these are both extremely capable knives that I'd use for relatively similar stuff. If you ask me which of these two knives is more expensive between Giant Mouse, the Ace Nimbus on the top here or the Ace Farley on the bottom, I would have told you that the Ace Farley was more expensive, when in fact it is $50 cheaper for retail than your Nimbus V3. And that's a consequence of what Bestech is doing compared to what is happening over in Maniago. Again, this is a knife that succeeds to the extent it does in spite of its quality and value, whereas the Farley here, the quality that you are getting for the price is in fact an asset. And the other thing, just to speak about value directly, we are in a period where we have seen a lot of high-end slip joints coming out. You've seen Jack Wolf knives, you've seen Pena getting back into slip joints, you've seen Superlative. I've got a review of one of theirs coming up. And a lot of those high-end slip joints tend to be landing in that $300 price point, which is a lot of money, especially for a Chinese-made knife. The fact that this guy is coming in at $165 with the level of quality it's got is very impressive. And I would put the fit and finish of this guy right on par with anything that is coming out of Superlative or Jack Wolf or any of those other big slip joint, Chinese-made slip joint makers right now. And so those are my thoughts on the Ace Farley. This was a very impressive knife to use. If you are into slip joints or even slip joint curious, I would definitely give this one a shot. I think it's a great way to try out a high-end slip joint. If you don't know if you're going to like it, there obviously are drawbacks. There is the inevitable fact that this is a two-handed opener. It can be a one-handed closer. It's a little... Actually, I'm not even going to do it on camera because I'm going to cut myself. You can pinch it down with your thumb, get it to the half stop and close it. It's sketchy. I don't like doing it. Assume this is a two-handed opener and two-handed closer, and that is awkward some of the time. Actually, it's awkward all the time. Sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it's not. But if you're okay with that, and you know what you're getting with a slip joint, and the fact that it doesn't lock isn't a problem, this is probably the best buy on the market right now for a modern high-end slip joint. And I really like it in this brass version. The handle heaviness does it a lot of favors. And the fact that they're offering it in LMAX rather than M390 right now on the site, to me, is a plus. So good job, Giant Mouse. I would love to see more knives just like this come out of Giant Mouse and Best Tex collaboration. And I am probably going to keep using this one because it was really a joy to use and it was fun to carry. And it's just a beautiful little object. And honestly, I like Vox and Onso. They were two of the guys that got me into knives in the first place. So I enjoy support. And the first high-end knife I ever bought was a Giant Mouse Ace Sonoma. So I do have a little bit of affection for their work and their brand as well. So yeah, that's the Giant Mouse Ace Farley. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you got any questions, please drop those questions. If you got any knives you would like me to look at or review, please give me suggestions. Other than that, hope this was a good use of your time, and I will see you again soon.